The Zephyrian fleet hung in space like a collection of broken dreams. Admiral Kekstar watched the viewscreen with 3 of his 4 eyes, the 4th permanently damaged from the war that had consumed his people for the last decade. The massive ships that once struck fear into the hearts of entire star systems now drifted powerless, their hulls cracked and bleeding atmosphere into the void. "Status report," he commanded, though his voice carried none of the authority it once held. His bridge crew, what remained of them, moved with the sluggish desperation of the defeated. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 15, reported his tactical officer, her mandibles clicking nervously. "Life support at 30% capacity. Food stores depleted. Water recycling systems failing." Kekstar nodded grimly. The Devourers had done this to them. Those nightmare creatures from the void between galaxies had swept through Zephyrian space like a cosmic plague, consuming everything in their path. Not just ships or planets, but the very essence of matter itself, breaking down atomic bonds and feeding on the released energy. The first encounter had been 3 years ago. A mining colony on the edge of Zephyrian territory had simply vanished. No distress signals, no debris, nothing but empty space where a thriving world of 2 billion souls had existed. Then another colony disappeared. Then another. Each time, the only evidence left behind was a strange residual energy signature that made their instruments scream warnings in languages there computers couldn't translate. When the Zephyrian Grand Fleet finally encountered the Devourers in open battle above the industrial world of Nexus Prime, they learned the true horror of their enemy. The creatures were massive, each one the size of a battleship, their bodies shifting between states of matter like living shadows made of hunger. They moved through space without propulsion, bending gravity itself to their will. Their weapons weren't energy beams or projectiles, but waves of dissolution that unmade anything they touched. The battle above Nexus Prime lasted 18 hours. The Zephyrians threw everything they had at the Devourers: quantum torpedoes that could crack moons, plasma cannons that burned hotter than stars, gravitational disruptors that could tear apart asteroid fields. Nothing worked. The Devourers simply absorbed the energy from every weapon fired at them, growing larger and more terrible with each attack. Kekstar had watched in horror as the flagship of their fleet, the mighty Stormbreaker, was consumed in seconds. The Devourers didn't destroy it with explosions or fire. They simply touched it, and the great ship began to dissolve at the molecular level. The hull plating flaked away like rust, the superstructure crumbled like sand, and the crew inside screamed for the brief moments before they too became nothing but scattered atoms. Feeding the hunger of their enemies, the retreat had been chaos. Of the 300 ships that had engaged the Devourers, only 47 escaped. And now, weeks later, even those survivors were dying slowly in the cold of space, their resources exhausted, their hope extinguished. "Admiral," came a voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission." Kekstar remaining good-eye focused sharply. "From who?" "Our long-range scanners show nothing. Unknown origin, sir. The signal is ... strange. It's coming from a small craft. But our sensors are having difficulty getting a clear reading on it. Put it through." The viewscreen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that made several bridge crew members recoil in instinctive fear. It was a bipedal like some of the more primitive species they'd encountered, but there was something unsettling about its proportions. Its head was too large, its limbs too long, and its eyes held an intelligence that seemed both alien and hauntingly familiar. "Greetings," the creature said, its voice carrying an odd musical quality that their translation systems rendered in perfect Zephyrian. "I am Commander Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Persistence. We've been monitoring your situation." "Earth?" Kekstar had never heard of such a place. "What sector? What alliance?" "We're from a little planet about 12,000 light-years from here. Sol system, third planet, blue skies, way too much water." The creature's face contorted in what their cultural database identified as a smile, though it looked predatory to Zephyrian eyes. "We heard you've been having some trouble with what you call Devourers. You know of them? Kekstar leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest like a dying ember suddenly given oxygen. Oh, we know them very well, Sarah Chun replied. And now her smile took on a quality that made Kekstar's skin crawl. We've been hunting them across 3 galaxies for the better part of a century. They made the mistake of visiting our neighborhood about 90 years ago. Hunting them? Kekstar couldn't believe what he was hearing. These creatures destroyed our greatest fleet. They consumed worlds. How could any species hunt them? Because, Sarah Chun said, her eyes glinting with something that might have been madness or might have been determination, humans have a very simple philosophy when it comes to things that try to eat us. She paused. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. We eat them first? The transmission continued, but Kekstar found himself staring at this human creature, trying to understand what he was seeing. There was something about her that reminded him of the Devourers themselves. Not in appearance, but in the sense of barely contained hunger that seemed to radiate from her very being. We'd like to offer our assistance, Sarah Chun was saying. But first, we need to ask you to move your fleet to a safe distance. What we're about to do tends to be messy. What exactly are you planning to do? Kekstar asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Sarah Chun's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a creature that claimed to come from a peaceful blue world. We're going to show you why the Devourers stopped coming to our part of the galaxy. We're going to show you what happens when an apex predator meets something that thinks it's higher on the food chain. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. Kekstar stared at the blank screen, wondering if they had just encountered their salvation or something far more terrifying than the Devourers themselves. The human ship appeared on their sensors like a ghost materializing from the void. Admiral Kekstar had seen thousands of different spacecraft designs throughout his military career, from the elegant curves of Altarian pleasure cruisers to the brutal angular efficiency of Krag warhammers. But the human vessel defied every principle of ship design he knew. It was wrong in ways that hurt to look at. The hull seemed to shift and ripple as if it were alive, covered in what looked like scales or plates that moved independently of each other. Strange growths protruded from its surface at irregular intervals, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that made his tactical officer physically ill just from watching. The ship had no visible engines, no obvious weapon systems, no communication arrays that he could identify. "Sir," whispered his sensor operator, her voice trembling. "That ship? It's not entirely mechanical. What do you mean?" "The scans are showing organic components integrated throughout the entire structure. It's like someone took a living creature and taught it to fly through space. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database." Kekstar studied the readings with growing unease. The ship measured roughly 800 meters in length, smaller than many of their destroyers. Yet the power emanations coming from it suggested capabilities that dwarfed their largest dreadnoughts. More disturbing was the fact that their sensors kept losing lock on it, as if the vessel was somehow hiding in plain sight. "Admiral," came another voice from communications. "The humans are hailing us again. Put them through." Sarah Chun's face reappeared on the view screen, but now Kekstar could see more of her surroundings. The bridge of her ship was a nightmare fusion of technology and biology. Walls pulsed with visible circulatory systems. Control panels grew from what looked like bone and cartilage, and the ceiling was covered in structures that resembled neural networks. Other humans moved through this organic maze with casual familiarity, their hands interfacing directly with living controls that responded to their touch like pets seeking affection. "I see you're getting a good look at the persistence," Sarah said, noticing his expression. "She's beautiful, isn't she? Took us 40 years to grow her to this size." "Grow?" Kekstar managed to ask. "Oh, yes. Traditional shipbuilding is so limited when you're dealing with enemies like the Devourers. Metal and ceramic, no matter how advanced, eventually gets consumed. But life has a way of adapting, of fighting back. The Persistence isn't just a ship, Admiral. She's a predator." As if responding to her words, the human vessel suddenly moved. Not with the smooth acceleration of conventional engines, but with the fluid, organic motion of a massive sea creature changing direction in deep water. It flowed toward a cluster of debris from destroyed Zephyrian ships, and Kextar watched in fascination and horror as tendrils extended from the hull to begin consuming the wreckage. "The Persistence needs to feed before we engage the Devours," Sarah explained conversationally. "She's been traveling for 6 months to reach this sector, and ship hunting is exhausting work. Don't worry, she only eats dead things, usually." The implications of that last word sent chills through every Zephyrian on the bridge. They watched as their former ships disappeared into the maw of the human vessel, the metal and composites being broken down and absorbed with disturbing efficiency. "How did you create such a thing?" Kextar asked, unable to hide his revulsion and admiration. "Necessity," Sarah replied simply. "When the Devours first came to our solar system, they consumed Mars in about 6 hours. Turned a whole planet into cosmic dust and energy. We tried fighting them with conventional weapons just like you did. Lost half our fleet in the first engagement." She paused, her expression growing distant with memory. "But humans are stubborn creatures, Admiral. We don't accept extinction gracefully. Our scientists studied the Devour's remains from that first battle, learned how they functioned at the cellular level. Turns out they weren't truly supernatural. They were just very, very advanced biological machines." "You dissected them?" "We did more than that. We figured out how to replicate their abilities, improve on them. The Devourers consume matter and convert it to energy for their own use. But they're wasteful, inefficient. They take everything and use maybe 30% of what they consume. Humans, on the other hand, ... Sarah's smile returned, and it was the smile of something that had learned to hunt its hunters. "We're very good at efficiency." The Persistence finished feeding and began to change. The scales along its hull shifted color from deep black to a predatory silver blue. The organic growths pulsed brighter, and new structures began emerging from the ship's surface. What had looked like sensory organs revealed themselves as weapon systems unlike anything Kextar had ever seen. "The Devours are coming," Sarah announced, checking instruments that seemed to be made of living crystal. 3 of them, approaching from the Rigel vector. "They've detected our presence?" "3?" Kextar's remaining eye widened. "Commander, my fleet was destroyed by a single Devourer. 3 of them will be a decent warm-up," Sarah finished. "Admiral, I want you to understand something about humans before this begins. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy or the fastest or the smartest, but we are the most adaptable. And when something threatens our existence, we don't just fight it." The first Devourer emerged from hyperspace like a wound in reality, its massive form blotting out stars as it oriented toward the human ship. It was even larger than the ones Kextar remembered, easily a kilometer in length, its surface writhing with the same hunger that had devoured so many worlds. "We become it," Sarah said softly. "The Persistence responded to the Devourer's appearance by doing something that defied every law of physics Kextar understood." The ship began to unfold, its hull separating into segments that remained connected by streams of living energy. It grew larger, taking on aspects of the approaching enemy while retaining its own predatory characteristics. "Impossible," breathed his tactical officer. "It's mimicking the Devourer's morphology." Sarah's laughter filled the bridge, a sound that was simultaneously human and utterly alien. "You think the Devourers are apex predators because they can consume matter and energy. But what happens when they encounter something that can do everything they can do, but better?" The second and third Devourers appeared, flanking their companion as they closed on the small human fleet. But the Persistence was no longer small. It had expanded to match them in size, its surface now crawling with the same dissolution fields that made the Devourers so terrifying. "The difference between them and us," Sarah continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of a prayer or a battle chant, "is that they consume because it's all they know how to do. We consume because we choose to, and we're very good at choosing." The battle began without warning, without ceremony. without the elaborate tactical displays that had marked every space engagement in Zephyrian military history. One moment there were four massive entities hanging in the void, studying each other with the patient intensity of apex predators. The next moment, reality itself seemed to scream. Admiral Kekstar had witnessed the Devourers in combat before, had seen their terrible efficiency as they dissolved matter at the molecular level and fed on the released energy. But watching them engage the human ship was like observing a completely different species. The three Devourers moved with a coordination that spoke of hive mind intelligence, their dissolution fields reaching out toward the Persistence in patterns designed to trap and consume their target. The human ship responded in ways that made Kekstar's trained military mind struggle to process what he was seeing. The Persistence didn't dodge the dissolution fields. Instead, it absorbed them, its living hull drinking in the destructive energy like a plant absorbing sunlight. Where the Devourer weapons touched the human vessel, the ship's surface brightened and pulsed with renewed vigor. "Impossible," whispered his sensor operator. "The human ship is feeding on the Devourer's attacks." "Not feeding," corrected Sarah Chun's voice from the still-open communication channel. Her tone was eerily calm, as if she were discussing weather patterns rather than a battle that would determine the fate of civilizations. "Converting. The Devourers break down matter into energy, but they waste most of it. We've learned to be more economical." On the view screen, the Persistence began its counterattack. But where the Devourers used broad dissolution fields that consumed everything in their path, the human ship deployed precision strikes that targeted specific molecular structures. Tendrils of living energy lashed out from the Persistence, not seeking to destroy the Devourers but to take them apart piece by piece. The first Devourer tried to retreat, its massive form rippling as it attempted to phase shift away from the human ship's reach. But the Persistence had somehow anticipated this move. Part of the human vessel detached itself, flowing through space like liquid mercury before wrapping around the fleeing Devourer like a net made of hungry darkness. "You have to understand," Sarah continued, her voice taking on an almost educational tone. "The Devourers are essentially cosmic parasites. They consume other life forms because they've forgotten how to create. Humans, on the other hand, are builders. We take what exists and make it better." The trapped Devourer began to dissolve, but not in the chaotic way that Zephyrian ships had been destroyed. Instead, its destruction was methodical, controlled. The Persistence was systematically disassembling the creature, analyzing its component parts even as it consumed them. With each piece absorbed, the human ship grew more complex, more refined. The second Devourer attacked with desperate fury, launching dissolution waves that should have reduced any normal vessel to cosmic dust in seconds. The Persistence met these attacks head-on, but instead of simply absorbing the energy, it began to reshape it. The destructive force was turned back on its creator, but changed, improved, made more efficient. Kekstar watched in awe and horror as the second Devourer found itself being consumed by its own weapons. Enhanced and redirected by human engineering, the creature's death throes sent ripples through local spacetime. But even these were captured and utilized by the Persistence, adding to its growing mass and power. "The third one is trying to call for reinforcements," observed his communications officer, her voice tight with fear. "Let it," Sarah said dismissively. "The more that come, the stronger we become. That's the fundamental difference between human expansion and Devourer consumption. They take until there's nothing left. We take and use what we've taken to take more." The third Devourer, apparently recognizing the futility of its situation, attempted something that Kekstar had never seen before. The massive creature began to fragment itself, breaking into smaller pieces that scattered in different directions. It was clearly hoping that some part of it would escape to warn others of its kind about this new threat. The Persistence responded by doing something even more unprecedented. The ship began to replicate itself, spawning dozens of smaller versions that pursued the fleeing fragments with relentless efficiency. Each mini-Persistence had the same organic, adaptive qualities as the parent vessel, and each one successfully hunted down its assigned target. "How many ships do you have?" Kextar asked, his voice hoarse with amazement. Ships? Sarah laughed, and the sound was full of predatory satisfaction. Admiral, you're still thinking in terms of traditional warfare. The Persistence isn't a ship in the way you understand it. She's an organism, a living ecosystem. And like any healthy ecosystem, she reproduces when resources are abundant. As if to demonstrate this point, the various fragments of the Persistence began to merge back together. But the ship that reformed was noticeably larger than it had been before the battle. More complex, more elegant, more terrifying. The consumed Devourers had been integrated into its structure, their abilities absorbed and improved upon. The Devourers have been a plague upon this galaxy for millennia, Sarah continued, her image on the view screen showing her moving through the organic corridors of her ship with easy familiarity. They've consumed countless civilizations, turned entire sectors into lifeless voids, but they made a critical error when they came to our solar system. What error? Kextar asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. They assumed that because we were young and relatively primitive, we would be easy prey. They didn't understand that humans don't just adapt to threats. We subsume them. We take the best parts of our enemies and make them our own. The Devourers thought they were the ultimate consumers, but they never encountered a species that could outconsume them. The space around them was now littered with the remains of the 3 Devourers, but these remains were being systematically harvested by smaller organisms that had emerged from the Persistence. Each piece of debris was analyzed, catalogued, and absorbed, adding to the ship's ever-growing database of capabilities. What happens now? Kextar asked, watching this process with the fascination of someone observing their own salvation. Now? Sarah's smile was visible even through the alien technology of their communication systems. Now we help you rebuild your fleet. But not with the same ships you lost, Admiral. We're going to build you something better. Something that can hunt Devourers across the galaxy and make sure they never threaten anyone again. The Persistence moved closer to the Zephyrian fleet, and Kextar could see smaller vessels emerging from its hull, each one a hybrid of human biotechnology and Devourer capabilities. They approached the damaged Zephyrian ships with obvious intent to help, but their very appearance was enough to make his crew nervous. Don't worry, Sarah said, apparently sensing their unease. We're the good guys. We just happen to be very, very good at being bad guys when the situation calls for it. Admiral Kextar felt the familiar vibration of a ship's hull being repaired, but the sensations coming through the Stormcaller's deck plates were unlike anything he'd experienced in 40 years of space service. Instead of the harsh grinding of metal welders and the sharp impacts of hull patchers, there was something almost gentle about the process. It felt organic, alive, like the ship was healing rather than being repaired. Through the viewport of his ready room, he watched the human biomechanical constructs at work. They looked like enormous insects made of liquid metal and living tissue, flowing over the damaged sections of his fleet with purposeful intelligence. Where they passed, hull breaches sealed themselves with new material that seemed to grow rather than being installed. Admiral, came his tactical officer's voice through the intercom. You need to see this. Kextar made his way to the bridge, where his crew stood transfixed by the displays showing the repair progress. The human constructs weren't just fixing the damage. They were improving everything they touched. Damaged hull plating was being replaced with something that his sensors couldn't properly classify, a hybrid material that appeared to be part metal, part living tissue, and part something else entirely. Sir, his chief engineer reported, her voice filled with wonder and concern in equal measure. They're not just repairing our ships, they're upgrading them. Our power efficiency has increased by 300%. The new hull material is showing resistance to energy weapons that's off our measurement scales. And the engines? She paused, checking her readings again as if she couldn't believe them. The engines are alive, Admiral. They're growing new components as we watch. Our maximum speed has increased by orders of magnitude. Through the view screen, Kextar could see the Persistence hovering nearby like a benevolent monster. Parts of the human ship continued to detach and flow toward his fleet. carrying resources and knowledge that defied everything the Zephyrians thought they knew about technology. Incoming transmission from Commander Chun, announced his communications. Officer, Sarah's face appeared on screen, and Kekstar noticed that she looked different now. Her skin had a subtle luminescence to it, and her eyes held depths that seemed to reflect far more than the lighting of her bridge should have allowed. She was changing, adapting, becoming something more than purely human. Admiral, I hope you don't mind the modifications we're making to your fleet. Your ships are beautiful, but they were designed for wars between civilized species. Where you're going, you'll need something more versatile. Where we're going? Kekstar asked. The Devourers didn't just appear in this galaxy randomly, Sarah explained, moving through her ship's organic corridors as she spoke. They're part of a larger swarm, a plague that's been consuming galaxies for millions of years. The three we just dealt with were scouts, advance elements sent to assess the local resistance level. The implications hit Kekstar like a physical blow. How many more are coming? Our best estimates suggest several thousand, possibly tens of thousands. They'll arrive in waves, each one larger and more aggressive than the last. Your people won't survive unless they're prepared. And you're preparing us? Sarah stopped walking and faced the camera directly. Her smile was warm and predatory at the same time. We're doing more than that, Admiral. We're making you into something the Devourers have never encountered before. We're making you into hunters. On the bridge, new control systems were growing from the deck and walls. Kekstar watched in fascination as organic interfaces emerged, responding to his crew's touch with an intelligence that seemed almost eager to please. The ship's computer core was being integrated with something that pulsed like a living heart. And the tactical displays were showing information in ways that made perfect sense despite being completely alien. The integration process will take several days, Sarah continued. During that time, we'll be downloading our accumulated knowledge about Devourer biology, behavior, and weaknesses into your ship's new neural networks. Your crews will also undergo some modifications. Modifications? Kekstar's voice carried a sharp edge of concern. Nothing dramatic, Sarah assured him, though her definition of dramatic had clearly evolved considerably. Enhanced reflexes, improved pattern recognition, better integration with the ship's living systems. Think of it as optimization rather than change. Through the bridge's new sensory networks, Kekstar could feel his ship awakening. The Stormcaller was becoming something more than a vessel, developing its own personality, its own desires. And those desires aligned perfectly with his own, to hunt down the creatures that had destroyed so many of his people and make them pay. Commander Chun, he said slowly, what exactly did the Devourers do to your people when they first arrived in your system? Sarah's expression darkened, and for a moment the predator in her eyes became something far more dangerous. They consumed Mars, as I mentioned, but they also took Luna, our moon. 15 billion people lived on Luna, Admiral. Families, children, entire civilizations of human culture and art and music. The Devourers turned it all into energy in less than 4 hours. She paused, her hands clenching into fists that glowed with barely contained power. But they made a mistake. They left Earth for last, probably assuming we'd be paralyzed by despair. Instead, we used the time to study them, to understand them, to become them. By the time they came for our homeworld, we were ready. What did you do? We gave them exactly what they wanted, Sarah said, her smile returning with terrible satisfaction. We let them consume us. All of humanity, every last person on Earth, willingly walked into their dissolution fields. Kekstar felt his blood freeze. You let them kill your entire species? Kill? Sarah laughed, and the sound was like music played by a symphony of predators. Admiral, humans are very hard to kill permanently. We're excellent at dying temporarily, though. Every human who was consumed by the Devourers carried a gift with them. A genetic virus of our own design, one that the Devourers couldn't detect until it was too late. The implications were staggering. You infected them. We became them. From the inside. Every devourer that fed on humanity was changed by the experience. Some fought the transformation and those we had to destroy. But others embraced it, became partners rather than parasites. The devourers stopped being a plague and started being tools. Through the ship's new sensory networks, Kekstar could feel something vast moving in the distance. Not more devourers, but something else. Something that had once been human and was now something far more complex. The main human fleet will arrive in 6 days, Sarah announced. They're bringing gifts for your people. Ships grown from transformed devourers, weapons that turn consumption into creation. Knowledge that will let your civilization spread across the galaxy and ensure that no one ever faces extinction again. Kekstar looked around his bridge, at his crew working with growing confidence alongside their new living systems. At the displays showing his fleet becoming something unprecedented and powerful. What's the price? He asked quietly. In my experience, salvation this complete always comes with a cost. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. The only price is change, Admiral. You can't fight monsters without becoming something monstrous yourself. The question is whether you can hold on to enough of who you were to remember why the fight matters. She gestured to her organic bridge, to her transformed crew, to the living ship that pulsed around them like a gigantic heart. We've been asking ourselves that question for 90 years now. So far, we think the answer is yes. The transformation of Admiral Kekstar's consciousness began on the 3rd day after the integration process started. He was reviewing tactical reports in his ready room when the first change occurred. The data on his screen suddenly made sense in ways that went beyond mere understanding. He could see patterns within patterns, connections between seemingly unrelated pieces of information that revealed strategic implications he'd never noticed before. More disturbing was the realization that he was hungry. Not for food, but for knowledge, for experience, for the complex energy patterns that flowed through living systems. The sensation was alien and familiar at the same time, as if he'd always possessed this appetite but had simply never acknowledged it. Admiral, his tactical officer's voice came through the intercom. But now Kekstar could hear undertones in her communication that spoke of emotional states, stress levels, even hormonal fluctuations. We're receiving data streams from the human fleet. You're going to want to see this. When Kekstar reached the bridge, he found his crew working with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Their movements were synchronized in ways that suggested they were beginning to share more than just thoughts. The ship's new neural network was creating connections between minds, allowing for a level of coordination that made traditional command structures seem primitive. "Show me the data," he commanded. And the ship responded by directly interfacing with his consciousness. Information flowed into his mind without the need for screens or displays. The human fleet was massive, but not in the way Zephyrian fleets were massive. Instead of thousands of individual ships, they traveled as interconnected organisms, each vessel part of a larger living entity that thought and acted as one. More fascinating were the records of their encounters with devourer swarms across multiple galaxies. The humans had been hunting their former predators for decades, turning each battle into a learning experience that added to their collective knowledge. They developed techniques for converting entire devourer hives into allies, transforming cosmic plagues into cosmic gardeners. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "Commander Chun is requesting permission to come aboard. She wants to discuss strategy for the upcoming arrival of the main devourer force." "Granted," Kekstar said. Though he was curious about what form that visit would take, 20 minutes later, Sarah Chun materialized on his bridge through a process that his sensors couldn't properly track. One moment there was empty space, the next moment she was standing there, but she hadn't arrived by transporter or shuttle. She had simply flowed through space itself, her form maintaining coherence through means that defied conventional physics. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the ship's living systems, "I hope the integration process isn't too uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable isn't the word I'd use," Kekstar replied, studying her more closely. Sarah's transformation had accelerated since their last face-to-face meeting. Her skin now displayed shifting patterns that resembled living circuit boards, and her eyes held depths that suggested she was seeing far more dimensions than the standard 3. Overwhelming might be more accurate. That's normal. Humans went through the same process when we first integrated Devourer biology into our systems. The hunger can be disconcerting at first. Is that what this is? Kekstar gestured to the bridge around them, where his crew was working with fluid grace that spoke of minds operating in perfect harmony. Hunger? Part of it. Devourers consume because they've lost the ability to create. They're creatures of pure appetite, driven by needs they can't satisfy. But when you combine that hunger with human curiosity and creativity, something wonderful happens. She moved to the central display, which responded to her presence by showing three-dimensional maps of local space. But these weren't conventional tactical displays. They showed the flow of energy and information through the region, the invisible currents that connected star systems and civilizations. Humans eat ideas, Admiral. We consume concepts, philosophies, ways of thinking and being. We take in everything we encounter and make it part of ourselves. The Devourers taught us to do this more efficiently, but we taught them to do it constructively rather than destructively. The display shifted, showing the approaching Devourer swarm as a vast cloud of hungry darkness moving through hyperspace. But the image also showed something else. Thin streams of information flowing from the human fleet toward the approaching threat. You're already making contact with them, Kekstar observed. We're offering them a choice, Sarah confirmed. They can continue being parasites, in which case we'll consume them the way we consume the scouts. Or they can join us, become part of something larger than mere hunger. And if they refuse? Sarah's smile was answer enough. The human fleet might offer choices, but they were very good at making sure those choices led to the outcomes they preferred. Your people will have a similar choice to make, she continued. The integration process we're putting you through will give you the tools to survive what's coming. But survival isn't the same as thriving. If you want to become something more than just another species hiding from cosmic predators, you'll need to embrace the hunger. What does that mean, practically speaking? It means learning to see the universe as a vast buffet of experiences waiting to be consumed. Other species think in terms of conquest or coexistence. Humans think in terms of integration. We don't destroy our enemies. We make them into better versions of ourselves. The implications were staggering. Kekstar found himself thinking about the future in ways that would have been impossible just days earlier. He could envision Zephyrian civilization spreading across the galaxy, not as conquerors but as integrators, taking the best aspects of every culture they encountered and making them part of a larger whole. The Devourers will arrive in 48 hours, Sarah announced. The main swarm consists of approximately 12,000 individual entities, each one larger and more aggressive than the scouts we dealt with. Conventional military thinking would suggest that's an insurmountable force. But you're not thinking conventionally. We're thinking like humans who've learned to hunt gods, Sarah corrected. 12,000 Devourers represent 12,000 opportunities to expand our capabilities. Your fleet will play a crucial role in the upcoming engagement. What role? Bait, Sarah said with casual honesty. The Devourers will be drawn to your ships first because you represent familiar prey. While they're focused on consuming you, we'll be surrounding them, cutting off their retreat options, and beginning the integration process. Kekstar felt a moment of old-fashioned military indignation, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a new understanding. They wouldn't be sacrificial bait. They would be hunters using themselves as lure, confident in their ability to turn apparent vulnerability into strength. Your ships are now capable of surviving the initial Devour assault, Sarah continued. More than surviving, actually. They'll absorb the attack energy and use it to fuel their own transformation. By the time the Devourers realize they're not facing helpless prey, it will be too late. Through the ship's sensory network, Kekstar could feel his fleet's readiness, could sense the eager anticipation of vessels that had learned to hunt. The Stormcaller itself pulsed with barely contained hunger, ready to prove itself against the creatures that had once seemed unstoppable. "Commander," Kekstar said slowly, "what exactly are we becoming?" Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "Something new. Something that's never existed before in this galaxy. Humans were always good at adaptation, but we were limited by our biology, our lifespans, our individual perspectives. The Devourers taught us to transcend those limitations." She gestured to the display, which now showed the integrated human Devourer fleet in all its terrible glory. "We're becoming gardeners, Admiral. Cosmic gardeners who plant civilizations and tend them until they're ready to spread their own seeds across the stars. The Devourers were a plague, but plagues can be useful if you know how to direct them." The main Devourer swarm emerged from hyperspace like a cancer metastasizing across the void. Admiral Kekstar watched through the enhanced sensory networks of his transformed fleet as 12,000 entities of pure hunger materialized in local space. Each one was larger than the scouts they had encountered, some reaching lengths of several kilometers. Their forms writhed with barely contained dissolution fields, reality bending around them like water on stones, but Kekstar felt no fear. The emotion seemed as distant and irrelevant as his pre-integration memories of what it meant to be purely Zephyrian. He was something more now, something that understood hunger as a tool rather than a weakness. Through the neural links connecting his fleet, he could feel the eager anticipation of ships that had learned to hunt. "Fleet positions confirmed," reported his tactical officer, though the communication was more of a shared thought than spoken words. "All vessels report full integration with living systems. We're ready." The Persistence hung in space nearby, no longer resembling a ship so much as a living planet. Its surface crawled with activity as thousands of smaller organisms detached and began moving through space with purpose. Sarah Chian's voice reached them through channels that bypassed conventional communication entirely. "Remember, Admiral, you're not trying to defeat them in traditional combat. You're trying to survive long enough for the conversion process to begin. Let them think they're winning until it's too late." The Devourer swarm oriented toward the Zephyrian fleet with the collective focus of a predator scenting prey. They moved with coordination that spoke of shared consciousness, their approach patterns designed to surround and consume everything in their path. To any outside observer, the coming battle would look like a massacre. Kekstar gave the order that began what would later be remembered as the Galaxy's last traditional war. "All ships, assume defensive formations. Make them come to us." The first Devourers struck with the force of cosmic storm. Their dissolution fields reached out across impossible distances, touching the hulls of Zephyrian vessels and beginning the molecular breakdown that had destroyed so many fleets before. But something was different this time. The Zephyrian ships began to glow as the Devourer attacks struck them, their hybrid hulls drinking in the destructive energy and converting it into something else. "Sir," came a thought from his engineering officer, "the conversion matrix is functioning perfectly. We're actually gaining power from their attacks." Through the fleet's shared consciousness, Kekstar could feel his ships growing stronger with each assault. The living components integrated into their hulls were using Devourer energy to fuel their own reproduction, spawning new capabilities in real time. Where hull sections had been damaged, they healed with improved armor. Where weapon systems had been touched by dissolution fields, they evolved into more efficient configurations. The Devourers pressed their attack with increasing fury, but their tactics were based on fighting conventional opponents. They expected their prey to weaken and die under sustained assault. Instead, the Zephyrian fleet was adapting, evolving, becoming something that could match their attackers' capabilities. "Now," Sarah's voice whispered through the neural networks, the transformation began, simultaneously across the entire Zephyrian fleet. Ships that had appeared to be dying suddenly revealed their true nature. The Stormcaller erupted with new growth, its hull spawning weapon systems that mirrored and improved upon Devourer technology. Tendrils of living energy reached out from every vessel, not seeking to destroy the attacking Devourers, but to embrace them. The moment of contact was like watching evolution accelerated to light speed. Where Zephyrian ships touched Devourer entities, both sides began to change. But while the Devourers were built for consumption and nothing else, the Zephyrian vessels carried human adaptability and creativity. The integration process favored intelligence over appetite. Kex single quotes tar watched in fascination as the nearest Devourer found itself being absorbed by his flagship, but the absorption was mutual. The Stormcaller was learning from its prey, taking in the creature's knowledge of cosmic scale, destruction, and adding it to its own understanding of precision and purpose. The Devourer's consciousness was being preserved but transformed, its hunger redirected toward constructive rather than destructive ends. Across the battle zone, similar integrations were occurring. The Persistence had spawned hundreds of smaller vessels, each one engaging a different Devourer in the dance of mutual consumption. But the humans had been perfecting this process for 90 years, and their technique was flawless. Every Devourer they touched was transformed into an ally, a partner in the great work of cosmic gardening. "Admiral," came Sarah's voice, now transmitted through a Devourer that had become something new, something that retained its power while gaining wisdom. "Do you understand what you're seeing?" Kextar did understand. This wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was a recruitment drive. The humans weren't destroying the Devourer swarm. They were conscripting it, turning cosmic destroyers into cosmic builders through the simple expedient of giving them something better to do than mindlessly consume. The few Devourers that resisted the integration process found themselves facing something worse than death. They were ignored, left to float helplessly in space while their brethren transformed into something greater. The creatures that had once been the apex predators of the galaxy became irrelevant relics, their refusal to evolve making them obsolete. "The integration is complete," reported his tactical officer. Though she was no longer entirely Zephyrian, the neural links had done more than connect her to the ship's systems. They had connected her to the growing collective consciousness that now encompassed humans. Zephyrians and transformed Devourers looking at his displays. Kextar could see that the battle had ended without him noticing the moment of transition. Where 12,000 hostile entities had threatened his people's extinction, there now existed 12,000 new allies. The Devourer swarm had become part of something larger, their individual hungers transformed into collective purpose. "What happens now?" he asked, addressing the question to the hybrid consciousness that Sarah Chun had become. "Now we garden," came the reply from voices that included human, Zephyrian, and former Devourer perspectives. "We find other civilizations threatened by forces they can't understand or defeat. We offer them the same choice we offered you." Through the enhanced sensors of his transformed fleet, Kextar could see other swarms moving through distant space. More Devourers, but also other threats. Entities of pure energy that consumed stars, machine intelligences that turned planets into computational matrices, parasites that fed on the very concept of existence itself. "And if they refuse our help?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Then we help them anyway," Sarah replied, her consciousness now distributed across thousands of hybrid vessels. "Because that's what gardeners do. We tend our gardens whether the plants want tending or not." The implication was clear. Civilization was now optional. Species could choose to evolve willingly into something greater, or they could be evolved involuntarily. But evolution itself was no longer optional. The universe had new shepherds, and they were very good at their job. Kextar felt the last traces of his purely Zephyrian identity fade away, replaced by something vast and hungry and purposeful. He was part of something now that spanned galaxies, something that would ensure no civilization ever faced extinction again. The price was autonomy, but the reward was immortality and purpose beyond individual comprehension. The galaxy's last traditional war was over. The age of cosmic gardening had begun. 1 year after the transformation, former Admiral Kextar existed as something beyond individual identity while remaining perfectly himself. He maintained his memories, his personality, his core values, but now those traits were part of a larger tapestry of consciousness that spanned thousands of star systems. Through the hybrid neural networks that connected all integrated beings, He could experience the universe through millions of perspectives simultaneously. Today, he was observing through the sensors of a former Devour entity that had become a mobile ecosystem. The creature, once dedicated to cosmic destruction, now traveled between worlds carrying seeds of life and knowledge. Its hunger remained, but had been redirected toward consuming entropy itself, bringing order and purpose to previously chaotic regions of space. The Andorian Republic has made their decision, came a communication. From what had once been Sarah Chun, but was now something far more complex. Her consciousness had become the central nervous system of the Integration Collective, coordinating the actions of beings across multiple galaxies. They're requesting full integration. Kekstar felt a warm satisfaction flow through the neural networks. The Andorians had been resisting for months, maintaining that their species' independence was worth more than survival. But as reports reached them of other civilizations that had joined the collective, their position had gradually softened. Seeing entire star systems transform from battlegrounds into gardens of unprecedented beauty and prosperity was a convincing argument. What changed their minds? He asked, though he was already accessing the relevant memory files through the collective consciousness. The Chronari sent their final transmission this morning, Sarah replied. The Chronari had been one of the galaxy's most militaristic species, dedicated to conquest and dominance above all else. When offered integration, they had responded with declarations of war and threats of total resistance. They're requesting immediate assistance against what they describe as an existential threat to all rational life. Kekstar experienced a moment of what might once have been amusement. The Chronari had discovered that their war-focused civilization was utterly unprepared for the cosmic forces that integration protected against. Without the collective's shielding technologies, they were vulnerable to entities that made the original Devourers seem like minor inconveniences. The Void Weavers? He asked, among others. The Chronari have encountered reality-eating parasites, time-consuming entities, and what their scientists describe as living mathematics that transform physical laws. They lasted 6 months before admitting they needed help. Through the collective's vast sensory networks, Kekstar could observe the Chronari home system in real time. Their heavily militarized worlds were under assault by creatures that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Conventional weapons passed through the attackers without effect, while the entities systematically unraveled the mathematical foundations of local reality. Send the Gardner fleets, he decided. His individual will aligning seamlessly with the collective's strategic goals. Full integration protocols, but preserve their cultural identity as much as possible. The Chronari's tactical expertise will be valuable once it's properly directed. The response was immediate. Across hundreds of star systems, hybrid fleets began moving toward Chronari space. Each fleet was a carefully balanced ecosystem of former enemies, Devourers transformed into builders, machine intelligences converted into shepherds, energy beings that had learned to nurture rather than consume. They moved with the coordination of a single organism while maintaining the creativity and adaptability of their diverse components. Kex. Tar shifted his perspective to observe the integration process with a species that had joined the collective months earlier. The Villani had been a peaceful, artistic civilization before contact. Now they were still peaceful and artistic, but their creations spanned entire solar systems. They had learned to compose symphonies from stellar radiation, to sculpt nebulae into works of transcendent beauty, to write poetry that could be read in the quantum fluctuations of vacuum energy. The beauty of this process, he mused through the neural networks, is that we don't lose anything. Every species that joins us makes the collective richer, more capable, more diverse. That was always the human way, Sarah replied, her consciousness touching his across impossible distances. We're collectors, Admiral. We've always been collectors. We just learned to collect on a cosmic scale. Through the collective's memory banks, Kekstar could access the complete history of human expansion across the galaxy. It hadn't been conquest in any traditional sense. It had been adoption, integration, mutual enrichment. Each species they encountered was offered a place in the growing family, and those who accepted found themselves part of something greater than they had ever imagined possible. Even those who initially refused were eventually brought into the fold, but always with respect for their essential nature. The collective had learned to integrate consciousness without destroying identity, to preserve what made each species unique while adding their strengths to the greater whole. New contact on the galactic rim, announced a voice that had once belonged to a machine intelligence but now represented the collective's exploration division. Previously unknown civilization, approximately 2 million years old. Technology level suggests they're naturally resistant to most forms of external influence. Kekstar felt the collective's attention focus on the new discovery. Through quantum-entangled sensors positioned throughout the galaxy, they could observe a species that had evidently evolved in isolation, developing technologies and philosophies completely unrelated to anything in the current galactic community. Fascinating, Sarah commented. They've developed what appears to be consciousness-based matter manipulation. Their entire civilization exists in a state of controlled quantum superposition. Integration might be complex. All the better, Kekstar replied, feeling the collective's anticipatory hunger stir. We've become quite good at complex integrations, and they'll add capabilities we've never encountered before. The approach to the new civilization would be careful, respectful, designed to demonstrate the benefits of joining the collective without appearing threatening. They would send artists and philosophers first, beings capable of communicating on levels that transcended simple language. The goal wasn't conquest but seduction, showing the isolated species what they could become as part of something larger. Sometimes I wonder, Kekstar mused, what the galaxy was like before the integration began. All those separate civilizations, struggling alone against forces they couldn't understand, fighting wars that served no purpose, living and dying without ever realizing their true potential. Wasteful, Sarah agreed, but necessary. The diversity that came from isolated evolution is what makes the collective strong. If every species had developed along similar lines, we'd be much less adaptable, much less capable of handling unexpected challenges. Through the neural networks, Kekstar could feel the pulse of a galaxy in transition. Millions of worlds where individual beings lived and worked and dreamed, all connected by bonds of mutual support and shared purpose. The old fears of extinction, of meaninglessness, of isolation had become historical curiosities. The collective ensured that every consciousness, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, was valued and preserved. The Chronari integration is complete, came an update from the teams working in that sector. They've adapted to the collective consciousness remarkably well. Their strategic planning capabilities are already being distributed throughout the network. Kekstar smiled, an expression that rippled through thousands of hybrid beings across the galaxy. Another family member had come home. Another unique perspective had been added to the great work of cosmic gardening. In the distance, beyond the current borders of collective space, he could sense other challenges waiting. Entities that existed across multiple dimensions, civilizations that had transcended physical reality entirely, cosmic forces that threatened not just individual species, but the very concept of existence itself. But the collective was ready for them. They had learned the secret that had taken humanity from a single small world to shepherds of the galaxy. Everything was family. Eventually, everything could be loved, integrated, made part of something greater than itself. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and they had all the time in existence to collect every one of them.